Well, hello everyone, and welcome back for another rollicking episode of Mondays with Mundy. That's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation at the Union League of Philadelphia, downtown Philadelphia. The COVID virus has really altered our world, and especially our political world, because we seem to have forgotten in a lot of ways that this is an American presidential election year. And the League and its art collection has one of the greatest political portraits or paintings relating to an American presidential election in the country itself. So we're going to talk about that, if that's okay with all of you. So it's a piece of art and it's a political statement. All right. It's also considered a portrait in the grand manner, which was a style that evolved in the 18th century in England when portrait artists would paint these wonderful full-length portraits of their subject, but surrounding them with visual metaphors that try to show them as a much more nobler spirit or individual, if you will. So I think you're going to see that that's what our artist, John Neagle, was trying to convey in his subject, Henry Clay. All right, so let me start screen sharing so you can all see what I'm talking about. Okay, let's try this. Okay, here we are. Here's our subject, or at least the artist. Okay, so John Neagle. This is a portrait of him done by Bass Otis. Now, Neagle was born in Boston by Philadelphia parents in 1796, but they came back to Philadelphia where Neagle would spend practically the rest of his life. Neagle showed an artistic talent, and so he was apprenticed to an artist named Thomas Wilson. Neagle was then next introduced to another famous Philadelphia artist named Bass Otis, who introduced Neagle to Philadelphia's most famous artist at that point in time, Thomas Sully. And Sully would eventually become Neagle's father-in-law after John Neagle married Sully's stepdaughter, Mary. All right, and that was in 1826. All right, so, but this is a portrait done in 1815, as you can see, so she was a very young John Neagle. Now, Neagle would go on to great fame in Philadelphia and around the country as well. In 1830 and 31, he became the director of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And in 1835, he would become a founder of the Artist Fund Society here in Philadelphia and would stay as president until 1843. And that's interesting because in 1841, Neagle would, as president of the Artist Fund Society, would encourage a bill in Congress that would slap a tariff, if you will, or a tax on imported European art in order to protect Philadelphia artists and sculptors from these imported paintings and pieces, to make sure that the American artist had a way of making a livelihood. And that's important because that reliance on a tariff would play right into Henry Clay, because Henry Clay was basically, if you want, almost the father of the American tariff. So let's go on to Henry Clay and the painting that we're talking about. All right, so here we are. This is the painting. It was commissioned by the Henry Clay Club of Philadelphia in 1842 in preparation for the 1844 election. Right now in 1840, the Whigs, of which Henry Clay was the founding individual, if you will, in 1834, the Whigs had won not only did they win the presidency, but they won both houses of Congress in 1840. So they were pretty confident of winning again in 1844. But still, they had to go out there and beat the drum. And so the Henry Clay Club in Philadelphia, whose chairman, Charles Gibbons, would later become a founding member of the Union League and the founder of the Republican Party in Philadelphia, commissioned this portrait through John Neagle of Henry Clay. And so Neagle journeyed to Clay's estate in Kentucky called Ashland, where he would paint this painting between October and approximately June of 1843. So again, portrait in the grand manner, you can see this wonderful figure of Henry Clay, which was considered to be the best of any painting of Clay himself, surrounded by these, as you said, these visual metaphors. And so let's go into those and see how we can explain this portrait of Henry Clay. So Henry Clay is the Whigs, the representative of the Whig. He will become the Whig candidate for president, right? And the Whig economic platform was based on something called the American system that Henry Clay basically had adopted from Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists in the early 1830s. So the American system relied on a strong central government. It relied on a central banking system that would both lend and borrow money to stimulate the economy and expanded both agriculturally and industrially, but especially industrially. all right? And most importantly, it relied on a tariff that would be charged against cheaper European manufactured goods. And of course, the object there was to protect American industrialists and their products in the American market, all right? The American system also provided for federally sponsored internal improvements. And back then, that meant basically transportation. So roads, canals, and railroads. As we know, railroads would build America in the 19th century, right? And then eventually, this system also called for free public education. So that is going to become the cornerstone of Henry Clay's platform in the 1844 election. So what better way to promote that platform, if you will, than a painting? And Neagle exceeded everybody's expectations. So here we have Henry Clay standing on this dais almost, if you will, and over his left shoulder, or to the right of him, if you will, you have that Doric column, and that represents government. And of course, Clay had been in government practically his entire life. I mean, he was a lawyer by profession, but a farmer in Kentucky, but a politician by and by, starting even before John Quincy Adams' administration, where he was Secretary of State. But so Clay is now reaching again for the presidency for the second time, having lost to Andrew Jackson in 1834. So we've got government, we've got Clay, the figure of Clay, and look at the way the light is coming in from the left and just illuminating his face and his hand, and then the American flag. And look at the size of that flag. It is monstrous. It is Clay's way and Neagle's way of saying the United States is now becoming a dominant power in the world. And we're going to take our place in the world itself. The flag is draping a globe that shows South America, because beginning in the 1820s, Henry Clay was a major proponent of independence for South American countries who were then under Spanish colonial rule. And by the 1840s, Henry Clay was the second most popular politician in all of South America, second only to Simón Bolívar. So that's saying a lot right there alone. This is also Henry Clay's way and the Whig Party's way of saying that, you know, to the rest of Europe, this is the West, this is our part of the hemisphere. This is our part of the world. We will control it, not you. All right. Hope that makes sense. All right. Now, the American system called for cooperation between agriculture and industry, because the two together were going to help create this great American country. And keep in mind too that this is a Philadelphia artist creating a painting for a Philadelphia audience. And at this point, Philadelphia is this country's largest industrial city, largest manufacturing city. And many of the men who subscribed to the commission of this portrait, and the cost was $1,000. Many of these men were some of the leading industrialists in Philadelphia itself. So, and so therefore, obviously it is in their economic self-interest to be Whigs and to promote Clay's presidency in 1844. So let's look at the symbols on the left-hand side of the painting. In the very bottom left-hand corner, you have a weaver's shuttle, because at this point, Philadelphia is already becoming the world's largest manufacturer of textiles, wool and cotton, all right? The world's largest, not just the country's, but the world's, all right? Okay, the anvil for manufacturing, iron, steel, coal, I mean, and also the steam engines that were used to drive the textile looms in all these mills, for instance. So manufacturing is, so the iron component of manufacturing is absolutely vital to Philadelphia's economic self-interest, but also to the nation's as well. And of course, we have agriculture. Henry Clay was this great mythology about Henry Clay that who was born about 15 miles north of Richmond, Virginia. After his father died, you know, he would go get up every morning and plow the fields barefooted and things like that. And so that was used by some of his campaign managers, shall we say, to produce this image of Henry Clay, the poor farm boy, you know, but who made well, but who understood the value of agriculture and farming to the American economy and the American farmer and him and herself. So look at that plow, and also notice that the steel blades in the front of it. All right, so again, you need iron to produce these plows that would then produce this world of agriculture in this country. All right, in the background we have two cattle. All right, Henry Clay was a farmer, and you know, and his estate in Ashland. And in the 1830s, he imported Herefordshire cattle from England as a way of hoping to improve American cattle livestock. So he was a man who also experimented in his ways to create a better agricultural world and economy in the United States itself, right? So in the background behind all of that, we have the ocean and a ship, all right? Two things, international commerce, obviously, which America needs to keep its own economy moving, if you will. It should mean three things, actually, take that back. It could also mean military power. These were the days that when you ruled the seas, you ruled the world. I mean, and that is absolutely vital. Because remember, back in the early 19th century, you know, the British Navy would often harass and capture American ships on the open sea. And Henry Clay was very much a proponent of creating a very strong Navy after the War of 1812. And he was considered in some ways then, maybe perhaps in the 19th century at least, you know, the father of the American Navy in some ways in that respect, all right? It also, I think, symbolizes the fact that here's Henry Clay and he will be the captain who guides the ship of America, you know, into a brave new world and a brave new future, all right? Which I think is kind of neat. Behind all that, though, we have this dark sky. There's the streaks of lighting and the light in the background, which means there's some things going on, but why that darkness? That's because there were many, many issues troubling America in the 1840s. The most obvious one would be slavery, right? Because as it turns out, that would become one of the major issues in the 1844 election. So anyway, so let's get back to the painting just for a second before we get to the election itself. So Neagle finishes the painting at Ashland. He then brings it back to Philadelphia, where at the Germantown-based Henry Clay Club, he will present this portrait to Charles Gibbons on behalf of the club itself, all right? And, but before that, it got even better. The official dedication of the painting would take place at the Musical Fund Hall at 7th and Locust Streets in Society Hill of Philadelphia, which at that point had already hosted a national political convention. So it was an appropriate building to unveil an American presidential campaign portrait in a lot of ways. I've done my best, but I have not been able to find the date of the actual unveiling itself. It is eluding even the almighty Google in some ways. But there was a crowd of hundreds inside the building, and there was a crowd of thousands on the outside. It was also an event that was attended by many, many women. And the first time, we believe, at least in Philadelphia, that women were invited to attend a political gathering or rally, if you will. All right. So here we are. So let's just say it's June of 1843. The painting is unveiled, and I mean, just look at it. It's a stunning painting. And so this painting would also be copied. There is now one in the Capitol, and there is now one at Ashland itself, but also Philadelphia's greatest 19th century engraver, John Sartain, would also make a copy of this. And that is how this was distributed throughout the country for the political campaign of 1844. So let's get to the campaign of 1844 a little bit. All right. So there are two parties, the Democrats and at this point, the Whigs. Right. As I mentioned earlier, the Whigs had won the presidency and both houses of Congress in the 1840 election. But then that's when William Henry Harrison made the mistake of not wearing his overcoat in the presidential parade, and he would die a month later of pneumonia. And that allowed his vice president, John Tyler, who was a Whig in name only, to become president. And Tyler didn't last long as a Whig. Twice in 1844, in 18, when was that? 1843, just about, 1842. I take that back, I apologize. Tyler vetoed Whig legislation twice. So clearly he wasn't following the party line. And so the Whigs basically threw him out of the party. He becomes a political independent with a home in neither the Democrats or the Whigs. Nobody really wanted him. But one of Tyler's main accomplishments he was hoping for would be the annexation of Texas as a state. Right now, Texas had already, if you will, seceded from Mexico. It declared itself an independent republic, which is what it was in the 1840s. And Tyler thought that if he could annex Texas, then he would become somebody's presidential nominee in the Whigs in 1844 election. That didn't happen, right? Because the Whigs opposed the annexation, and specifically Henry Clay. All right, and what's the big issue in Texas? Slavery, right? Many Southern plantation owners had already moved there with their slaves. It was a vast agricultural area, and so the Whigs were beginning to fragment into two camps: the conscience Whigs, that is the abolitionists, versus the cotton Whigs. All right, those who supported slavery. All right, so this rift is evolving now within the Whig Party itself. But Henry Clay, even though he was a slave owner, was primarily an abolitionist. Actually, he also believed in the liberation societies that would take American slaves and repatriate them back into Africa itself. So Clay opposed that, and unfortunately, at this point in time, something called manifest destiny is boiling to the political surface in America, where this philosophy that, Americans are exceptionalists, that is, divine providence has endowed them with this incredibly large landscape, if you will, and they had the God-given right to occupy every square inch of it and to make it theirs and to do with it what they wanted. And so, obviously, by being against the annexation of Texas, you're kind of going counter to this philosophy of manifest destiny that the Democratic candidate, James Polk, would use to his advantage. Polk was also a pro-annexationist, right? He thought it was a good thing to annex Texas, right? And he was also more pro-slavery versus Clay's anti-slavery. Now, there was a wild card in this election in 1844. There was a third party called the Liberty Party that popped up as an abolitionist party. Its candidate was James Birney from Massachusetts, and it's going to become the spoiler, because when the voting ended, and the voting took place over 4 weeks' time, and this was the first national election where the election started in November, but it ended in December. And after those 4 weeks, James Polk would win the election by 1.4 percentage points over Henry Clay. And the spoiler part, James Birney got 2.3% of the vote. And especially, he would keep the voters in both New York and Michigan voting for Polk and not Clay. And that's important because not only did Polk win the popular vote, but he'd also win the electoral vote, 170 votes to 105 for Henry Clay and the Whigs. So Henry Clay lost his chance again to become president of the United States. But boy, did it produce a heck of a painting. And all I can do, please go online. You can see it online itself. It's just a great painting. But again, Portrait in the Grand Manner, the American System, the Whigs, Henry Clay, election of 1844. I mean, it's all there right in front of you with this wonderful symbolism that we could keep talking for days about American history based on this painting alone, but we don't have days, and I've probably taken up too much time as it is. So I hope you've enjoyed this painting, and I hope you enjoyed the history part of it as well. And if you ever get the chance to go to the League, remember that usually in every February, we have a big open house where the public is invited to walk through the building, and they get to see the art collection, and you literally walk within feet of this painting, this portrait of Henry Clay on the 15th Street stairwell on the landing. It's just breathtaking and should be seen by all. So please keep that in mind. All right, so we've come to the end of another Mondays with Mundy. I got that right this time. I get it wrong myself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I know it's a tough July out there in a lot of ways, between the virus and the heat and everything else. So just once again, everybody stay safe, stay well, take care, and hopefully we'll see you next week. So thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the Union League Legacy Foundation, please be careful out there. Goodbye.